There is a payroll ledger from the construction of the Philadelphia City Hall that has been sitting in the Philadelphia City Archives since 1901. I requested it. I read every page. The ledger documents 22 years of construction activity. Worker names. Daily wages. Material deliveries. Contractor payments. Everything you would expect from the most ambitious civic construction project in 19th-century America. What it does not contain is a single entry for ornamental stone carvers. Not one. For a building covered in 250 individually sculpted figures. For exterior stonework that architectural historians consistently describe as among the finest produced in 19th-century America. For decorative elements so technically complex that restoration teams working on the building today use computer modeling to understand how they were executed. Zero payroll entries for the people who made them. I want to be honest about what that absence might mean. Subcontracting arrangements in Victorian construction were often layered. A primary contractor might pay a master carver directly who paid his own team from a separate ledger that was never filed with the city. The absence of entries is not proof of anything. But here is what I cannot dismiss. I checked 7 other major Victorian civic buildings across 3 countries. Same pattern. 7 for 7. The general construction labor is documented with extraordinary precision. The ornamental work that defines these buildings, the work that should have required the largest concentration of specialized skill, exists in the architectural record as finished product and nowhere in the labor record as human activity. The buildings contain the work. The archives contain no trace of the workers. Here is what they teach you about Victorian architecture. An explosion of civic ambition funded by Industrial Revolution wealth. Skilled craftsmen trained through guild traditions. Pattern books like Owen Jones's Grammar of Ornament distributing ornamental vocabulary across the Western world. A coherent story of human skill meeting institutional ambition at a unique historical moment. That account is real. I am not contesting it. Here is what the account cannot explain. In the 1870s alone, Philadelphia City Hall, Vienna State Opera, Paris Opera Garnier, Manchester Town Hall, and New York State Capitol were all under simultaneous construction. 4 countries. 4 governments actively hostile to each other in certain decades. 4 completely separate material supply chains. 4 architectural firms that had no documented professional relationship. The ornamental vocabulary across all 5 buildings is so consistent that architectural students studying the period have to check provenance stamps to distinguish facade elements from different continents. That consistency requires explanation. The official explanation is shared pattern books. Here is why that explanation fails at the most basic level. A pattern book tells you what something should look like. It does not give you the 10,000 hours of physical muscle memory required to execute it in stone. The difference between an apprentice mason reading Owen Jones and a master carver producing the Capitol on Manchester Town Hall is not a matter of information. It is a matter of hands. And the hands that produced these buildings have no documented origin anywhere in the archival record I have been able to find. Let me show you the training pipeline problem because this is where the official history simply stops. Every craft tradition has a point of inception. A moment when someone first produced the thing that would be taught forward through apprenticeship chains across generations. For the ornamental vocabulary of high Victorian architecture, that point of inception is missing. The tradition appears in the historical record already complete. Already at maximum complexity. Already distributed simultaneously across 4 continents. It does not develop. It does not have early awkward examples followed by refined mature work. It arrives in the 1850s and 1860s in full flower across every Western city simultaneously and then remains at that level of complexity for 30 years before declining. That is not how craft traditions develop. That is how craft traditions are inherited. I want to name the strongest counterargument here because intellectual honesty requires it. Training pipelines for skilled trades were often informal. Apprenticeship relationships left no paper trail. The absence of documented schools does not mean there were no schools. That is a fair objection and I hold it carefully. But it does not close the gap. Because informal transmission through apprenticeship chains still requires time. Still requires generations of practice. Still leaves traces in the early imperfect work that preceded the mature achievement. For Victorian ornamental stonework those traces do not exist. The early imperfect examples are simply absent. The record begins at mastery. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago is the example I cannot explain away. 290 acres of monumental Beaux-Arts architecture built in approximately 2 years. Attended by 27 million people. Then demolished within a decade. The official explanation is that it was built from staff, a temporary composite material never intended to be permanent. That explanation is documented and I accept it. What I cannot accept is what the most respected architectural critic in America at the time wrote about those buildings. Montgomery Schuyler, writing an architectural record in 1893, observed that the White City's ornamental precision was superior to the permanent civic architecture being erected contemporaneously in most American cities. More detailed. More coherent. Built faster. A temporary exhibition produced better work than the permanent buildings being constructed by the same civilization at the same moment using durable materials. That gap between demonstrated capacity and official permanent output is not explained by economics or politics or the preference for newer construction. That gap has a shape. And the shape suggests that the capacity to produce this work did not originate where the official history says it originated. Here is the detail I cannot make fit anywhere. In the ornamental stonework of dozens of documented Victorian buildings across 3 continents, structural engineers doing restoration work have found something that was not in any of the original published architectural drawings. Internal load-distributing geometries embedded inside decorative elements. Invisible from the exterior. Serving no decorative function. Structurally unnecessary by the engineering standards of the era. But present. Consistently. Across buildings designed by different architects in different countries from different material sources. Someone made a decision, in every one of these buildings, to embed engineering calculations inside decorative stonework that no one would see and that the published drawings did not require. Forward calculation for stresses that would take centuries to manifest. By workers whose training we cannot document. On timelines that strain every model of labor capacity we have for the period. I have spent a long time trying to close that gap. The conventional explanations partially work. Economics. Immigration. Guild knowledge crossing the Atlantic. Pattern books distributing vocabulary. Partially. But a building does not contain invisible internal engineering from a civilization that doesn't know it needs to plan for centuries unless the civilization that built it had already been standing for centuries. Unless the hands that shaped that stone had been shaping stone for longer than the official history of those hands allows. The payroll ledger from Philadelphia City Hall documents 22 years of construction. 250 sculpted figures. 0 carvers. The workers were there. The work proves they were there. The archive simply has no record of them arriving. No record of them being trained. No record of them existing anywhere before the moment the stone required them. And no record of where they went when the stone was finished. The buildings remember the hands that made them. The archives remember everything except the hands. And that specific shape of forgetting is not accidental. It never is.